I did my topic on how poverty affects children. I argue that poverty affects children in academics and in physical and mental development. Today I'm going to be addressing the issue of child poverty in the United States. Poverty is associated with impairment in school and in learning achievement, less education and attainment, lower paying jobs, inadequate health care, poor nutrition, and exposure to violence. If we don't help fix the issue of poverty or child poverty, these children will remain poor when they engage in the economy. The issue of child poverty goes unnoticed and is hidden by the media in America, but we do such a great job showing poverty in other countries. Why can't we start helping ourselves first? Let's take a closer look on how poverty affects children. Today I'll be discussing three broad factors that go into child poverty: academics, negative development, and behavior development. In academics, we'll go into depth how poverty affects children's cognitive development, which affects how they do academically. In negative development, I'll go into depth how health outcomes children face when they're in poverty, along with mental illness and disorders they're more likely to have because of their socioeconomic status. Behavioral outcomes, we're going to look at the neighborhood these children are living in and how their environment can affect them and their life expectancy. Academic outcomes deal with the child's level in cognitive development. According to Coley, Miller, and Vitruba, cognitive skills emerge in infancy, and by kindergarten, the children from low-income families score 0.70 in standard deviations, which shows the average of test scores is lower than the higher income children in language, reading, and math skills. Poor children also receive less investment in their schools. They're also more limited when it comes to school resources like books, technology, extracurricular activities, having healthier choices at lunch, and having fewer faculty members in schools. According to Fitzgerald, Jovovich, and Miller, in their research where they wanted to see if poverty was linked to disorders and having some type of diagnosis, they found there are deficiencies in the brain in these children that live in poverty. They do have underdeveloped areas in their brains. For example, in the frontal lobes that deals with behavior, personality, and voluntary movement. The temporal lobes are also affected, and that deals with understanding of speech. The hippocampus is another part of the brain that is also affected, and that deals with emotion, memory, and the nervous system. All of these are essential for learning and developing cognitive development. Poor children struggle in these aspects. According to Coley, Miller, and Vitruba, they found that the gaps in the children's development have grown. The gap is 30 to 40% for children born in 2001, which doubled from the 1970s, which just shows that poverty is only increasing. We haven't given these children the resources they need to get out of their socioeconomic status. Fitzgerald, Jovovich, and Miller also found that these academic constraints will reduce their occupational achievements once these children enter the job market, which leads them into this cycle of poverty. Negative development deals with the health outcomes, mental illness, and disorders children in poverty are at greater risk for. According to Fitzgerald, Jovovich, and Miller, children who live in poverty are 3 times more likely to develop psychiatric conditions. Some externalized disorders these children are at risk for are ODD, which is oppositional defiant disorder, which deals with having a recurrent pattern of stubborn, hostile, disobedient, and defiant behaviors. CD, which is conduct disorder, which is much more severe than ODD. And it deals with a repetitive, persistent pattern of severe aggression and antisocial acts. And another disorder that's more likely for children in poverty is ADHD, which is an attention defiant hyperactivity disorder. And this disorder contributes feelings of low self-esteem, troubled relationships, and it's hard for them to focus in school and work if it's untreated. According to DePrice, Francis, Gross, and Wilson, 1 in 8 children live in homes where their parent, one or two of the parents, have a poor mental health, which raises the child's more likelihood to develop a disorder. Children and families are living in this never-ending cycle of poverty, which is nearly impossible to get out of if we don't give them the resources and everything that they need so they can improve their lives. Some internalizing disorders that children in poverty are more likely to have are depression, anxiety, and coping skills. They also have a higher rate when it comes to low birth weights. Children which can affect the child's nutrition development. They are more likely to develop asthma from the pollutants, and they're more likely to develop obesity because, well, according to DePrice, Francis, Gross, and Wilson, they're eating at low cost and in high calorie foods, and that deals with not having enough money to buy healthier foods or have healthier options when you go to the supermarket. And then their lack of being able to go exercise or having a gym close by for them to go to, and then it also leads for them not having enough money to even afford a gym membership. So everything just ties in together and they're just even more limited. Asthma is another health issue that children in poverty are also living with. Children who live in the federal poverty line are more likely to have asthma. The children in poverty develop asthma because of the environmental exposures that's around them, which are hazardous waste sites, industrial facilities, and sewage treatment plants. People agree that families in poverty should be helped when it comes to building the housing for people in poverty, but they don't want the housing to be next to them, and that's why people in poverty get stuck with their houses next to these industrial facilities and these factories and all these harsh chemicals that are in the air, which causes them to have health problems, which leads us to behavioral outcomes. So we're going to look at how neighborhoods can impact poverty, children, and their lifespan. Children in poverty are at higher risk for criminal activities, poor health, and distress. Like before, I mentioned that children living in poverty in poor neighborhoods can impact their health outcomes. Children are more exposed to having a parent incarcerated, exposure to violence, housing instability, having to move a lot because their parents or a parent can't make ends meet, and substance abuse. According to DePrice, Francis, Gross, and Wilson, parents also feel the effects of poor neighborhood and the outcomes they bring to their children. This affects parents' ability to provide a safe, stable, responsive, nurturing environment for their children. Parents need to create kinship ties to protect their children. When they cannot be at home with them because they have to go to work. So parents create social and community networks for support and provide safe home environment to their best of their ability for their kids. Poverty is rarely discussed in the media. When was the last time you saw the news channel and addressed child poverty? We have a fair amount of commercials that show us poverty in other countries and how we can help them with money, clothes, donate, etc. But what about the children in poverty in America? Why aren't we helping them they being shown? We know that poverty has only increased and this issue still goes unnoticeable. It was hard to find media articles that focus on the issue, which tells you something. In the New York Times article by Peter Arkell, he discusses that child poverty cost the nation $1.03 trillion in 2015. To paint a picture even more, 1 million out of the 4 million children born each year are going to end up in poverty. New York Times article that I found by Nicholas Kristof, where he addresses what is America doing about poverty. President Trump is cutting benefit programs that is only going to hurt the children in poverty and their families, as if the children's life expectancy wasn't hurting them enough. Kristof puts into perspective that a child living in South Carolina has a shorter life expectancy than children in China. Research done by Eden and Schaefer found that 3 million children live in extreme poverty with an income of $2 per person per day, which is an average. How do we expect low-income families to provide for their children when they have these wages and it's completely impossible for them to have an honest living? Other countries provide universal health care, while in the United States, American children have been dying at higher rates. Some solution we can do to prevent child poverty is housing, transportation, child care, education, job and wages, social safety net, financial literacy, leadership, and race equality, which is going to take some time. In academic journals, I found information about academics, research that shows links between cognitive development effects and health issues that are caused by the environment. For an example, in the article that I found, Child Poverty, Toxic Stress, and Social Determinants of Health, Screening and Care Coordination by DePress, Francis, Groth, and Wilson in 2018, children who face food insecurity are more likely to experience a host of health, development, and student achievement issues. In the media, I found New York Times articles mention more about cost, but didn't really focus on the fact that what poverty is actually doing to children. But you can go find interesting information in news articles, and you can find out more about what's going on and how we can help end child poverty.